Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar promoted by the Institute of Public Policy. I would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants in this webinar. We are experiencing a digital revolution and the digitalization of our economies and societies, and the COVID pandemic only increased this acceleration of the digitalization of the economy. In this context, the European Commission just launched two very important initiatives, the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act. And the Institute of Public Policy thought that was a good occasion under the Portuguese Presidency of the Council to debate, in particular, the DMA, but also a bit the DSA. So the aims of this webinar are threefold. First, we would like to clarify the scope of these two proposals of the European Commission. Second, we would like to understand better how the three main institutions who are the co-legislators, the Commission, Parliament, and the Council, see all this process that is just beginning. And thirdly, we would like to understand how some of the stakeholders in this process, namely the industry, the big industry, but also the medium enterprises, react to this initiative and the questions they have on this regard. So just a brief words about the Institute of Public Policy, which is a think tank located in Lisbon. And we strongly believe that we need to have good public deliberation about laws, proposals, and also the institutions that are going to implement these laws. So our aim as a non-governmental organization is to promote this debate, and that is what we are going to do here today during this half an hour. Now, I'm going to introduce and I'll start to thank the Minister Pedro Ciso Vieira. He is the Minister of the Economy and the Digital Transition. It's the first time in Portugal ever in democracy that we have a Minister of a Digital Transition. And I think this shows the importance that digital transition plays in this current government. So we are very honored that Minister Pedro Ciso Vieira can be with us and explain a bit what is happening in terms of the Portuguese Presidency of the Council, and in particular in regarding these two proposals. So I will not lose much more time, and I give the floor to Minister Pedro Ciso Vieira. Thank you again, his presence, because I know he's a very occupied person with these COVID measures that have to deal every day towards firms and workers and all this. So having some time to be with us, it's an honor. Thank you. Minister Pedro Ciso Vieira, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Professor Trigo Pereira, and good morning to all participants and all those who are watching this debate, which I think is very timely, and I would like to congratulate the Institute of Public Policy for taking this initiative. You have mentioned that Portugal has, for the first time, a minister which is responsible for digital transition within government. It's not that we have neglected digital topics, and I'm looking at Member of European Parliament, Maria Manuel Leitão Marques, who in the previous Portuguese government was responsible precisely for a number of matters which put Portugal in one of the top areas in e-government in Europe. But this is to say that we are now taking a more holistic approach, and actually this corresponds to the fact that we have defined digital transition as one of the four strategic challenges that the country will have to face and prepare to deal with in this coming decade. And then in doing so, I think we are much aligned with the priorities of the European Commission ever since President von der Leyen defined the priorities for the mandate of this current transition. One of which, of course, is to prepare Europe to become a continent which is ready and fit for purpose in terms of the new digital age. The idea being that whilst other regions in the world have taken the lead in terms of the internet for people and businesses, Europe is now trying to catch up and actually take a lead in terms of a new era for digital, which is digital becoming more prevalent in the manner where our businesses operate, how they interact with clients, how they interact with each other, and more than that, how we manage our cities, how we manage our health services, and how we connect all the data being generated by devices all over. So I think that when defining the priorities for this current mandate, the Commission set not only the Green Deal as a priority, but also digital transition. There's a very ambitious program in terms of legislative activity of both the Parliament, the Council, the Commission, around these topics. And what I would like to do in the next few minutes is talk a little bit about how the Portuguese presidency looks into these topics and why we believe these are critical to our common future. And I will focus then on the DMA and the DSA, not referring in detail to what is happening, because I think other participants will talk about that, but just setting the scene to how we are trying to intervene. And I think that we all recognize that the acceleration of digital transition is now very apparent to us all. In the last year only, most of European citizens have turned into digital in the way we work, we interact with each other, in the way we make basic purchases, in the way we make payments, in the way businesses operate. To give you an example, the number of Portuguese citizens which have never used the internet has been reduced dramatically in this last year. The number of people purchasing online has increased very significantly. The number of e-payments has also increased very dramatically. And most of all, where we have probably 40% of companies which conducted business online, after this last year, we are close to 60%. So I think this only makes it clear that the society was prepared to become more digital. And we are now on the verge of taking the full potential of these technologies. At the same time, we understand that these are areas which now have a very significant weight on the economy and on our society, and which was mostly unregulated, to be honest. As technology has increased in the last few decades, and has the capacity, the technological capacity of transmitting, storing, processing data has increased, we have seen that a small number of very large companies have taken advantage of these technologies and the fact that they actually operate outside the physical boundaries of markets and in a sphere which is not very specifically regulated by any given specific national legislation, to build global models and to develop business models which were unconstrained in how they operated. We have seen that competition rules were particularly unable to cope with issues related to these technologies. Competition rules are mostly focused on topics such as price for consumers, and most of these companies have business models which basically are dependent upon the relation with users is not charged, but they rather collect data which then they monetize that afterwards in a different manner. They compete for attention and provide some services which are very useful free of charge because they monetize the data they collected. The fact that taxation, the international taxation system, was particularly incapable of actually playing to a model which is based on providing services globally, irrespective of fixed physical location. And this has allowed very large companies to play around the international taxation systems and allocate on an accounting basis profits to jurisdictions where taxation was lower, and thereby amassing huge piles of profit which remained untaxed, and providing them a significant power both to develop technology, to continue to invest in attracting attention, or to nip in the bud potential competition. We have seen how very large technological companies have purchased potential competitors before they even become important. Finally, on content, digital platforms, digital networks are presented as being neutral. They are not responsible, as mass media traditionally was, by the content they publish. The idea is that they are a neutral platform where everyone can process messages which is accessible to mostly everyone. This was a promise of freedom and of a very flexible society, which finally turned into a situation where these platforms compete for attention. They target the messages that they direct to users based on the algorithms they are able to develop. And actually, as consumers of information, we mostly receive content that is presented to us in a manner which is not transparent to everyone and which everyone cannot state. So a lot of issues became prevalent because of these technologies. Basically, we do not know who is responsible for content online. We see decisions being taken and the most recent example is the vetting of access to former President Trump to a number of platforms, decisions being taken by these platforms in a manner which is seen as untransparent and limiting freedom of expression. But at the same time, we constantly complain about how hate speech or illegal content is diffused by these social networks. Finally, another topic, which is now more obvious than ever. Most companies cannot ignore the online channel. People sell more and more through large platforms or marketplaces, which will become even more important to conduct business. If you're a small restaurant which has been required to close, the only manner you have to sell your services is by having a presence in a platform. If you're selling a product and you're an industrial or a designer or whatever, if you're selling a product, to contact your clients, which are mostly becoming online clients, then you have to have a presence. And we need to make sure that these platforms actually treat impartially those businesses who need to access these platforms to conduct business. If you want, it's the same problem we had on traditional retail channels. We had a couple of very large retailers which could impose their conditions on small producers, which could not ignore those channels. The same thing is happening with these digital marketplaces. So we see that there are areas which we need to provide regulation because this sphere has become too important, too pervasive, to allow the communities and the body politic to ignore the impact that these things have on businesses and on citizenship. So I think it's time for regulation. And we are feeling the requirement for regulation everywhere. And just recently, we have seen examples of how the US Department of Commerce has taken judicial action against certain platforms. We have seen how Australia has passed legislation in respect of providing compensation by digital platforms to mass media companies which produce content, which is then circulated through these areas. We have seen how a number of countries are taking initiatives to tax digital companies, and how the OECD itself is trying to review the international taxation system to make sure that we have a system which is now fit for purpose, taking into account the new realities of the digital economy. So these are all topics which become important. And I think that Europe, if I may say this is an image which has been impacted on me and impressed on me like this. What we have now in the digital economy and with these digital giants would be the equivalent on the physical world, as if in the beginning of the 20th century, we had built a massive network of highways across the world. We have given a motor vehicle to each citizen in the world, and we had not drafted road laws, so no one knew exactly how to conduct. And a few of the players, probably the operators of the highways, those who had built the highways, were allowed to sort of direct traffic to those gas stations which they preferred because they paid for it. So this is basically a situation where we need to regulate this sphere of our collective life, and in doing so, we will certainly impact on the business models that have been developed in the absence of this rule. And this is the moment of adjustment. Now, I think that the European Union is particularly well placed to provide a balanced regulation of these aspects. It will be done incrementally, but it will be done decisively. And we have to do that, and I think that the European Union is capable of doing so because of the two things which I believe are important. The first thing is that we are a very important market. We are a very large consumer market. We are a very significant business-to-business market. So everyone who has a presence in global markets needs to have a presence in Europe. So Europe is in a condition to set standards and set global standards. We have seen that with the general regulation on data privacy, where the rules which Europe has enacted becomes the sort of gold standard which other regions in the world, including the US, want to do so. And the second thing, which I believe Europe has an ability to set a standard, is the fact that we don't have very large companies in Europe. So the lobbying process is done from outside rather than within the legislative bodies themselves. So we are interacting as presidency and commission with a number of stakeholders, but I think we are more neutral than probably the US Congress or the Chinese Communist Party. So I think that this is the moment to provide regulation. This is the moment to prepare our framework in a manner which is as much as possible global, common to the whole European Union. And we will be doing this in a very decisive manner. So we're working closely with the Commission to advance the works on the DMA, on the DSA, the DMA trying to regulate how digital markets work with a particular focus on the situation of businesses across Europe who want to access these marketplaces, these platforms. The DSA, the Digital Services Act, more focused on content on these platforms and how they are responsible for making sure that nothing which is illegal offline is made online. Finally, I would just like to say that if we do this right, we will provide a framework which ultimately will be beneficial for all. the worst nightmare that we could have, the worst thing that could happen to the European Union is that rather than having a single unified market where a very small company can conduct business across the whole market and take advantage of the 450 million consumers, we would be dealing with 27 different national regulations. We would lose what has been more important in the past few decades for businesses across Europe and consumers across Europe, which is the benefit of a single market. We have to take the single market into the digital age. We have to provide a single framework for the whole of the European Union and make it so in a manner which is balanced, which is consistent with the European values, and which hopefully will set a global standard for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Pedro Cisa Vieira, for the strong commitment that we understand that the European Council is putting on these two proposals. Let me just highlight 2 or 3 ideas. The idea that we need regulation first, the idea that regulation has to be incremental but decisive, and also that the European Union, because it's a very big market, should promote the standards that will be implemented in the digital markets and the digital world. Well, thank you again, Minister Pedro Cisa Vieira. And now we move to our next speaker, Stephen Erlich, professor at Nova School of Business and Economics. Stephen has been publishing and teaching in this area of competition and regulation for some time. He's associate professor. Tomorrow, hopefully, he will be full professor at Nova. We invited Stephen to make a background paper for this webinar, which is available in our site. And I think all the participants should have received the paper in a brief 16 or 17 pages, try to frame the discussion. I think it is very balanced paper, and I thank you, Stephen, very much for that. So Stephen is going to present a bit the frame of the discussion that we will follow. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to write the background paper and just set the stage here for the discussion that you actually want to see. So let me just describe shortly what this is all about. So the European Union has been playing catch up with the digital economy for a few years now. There are different kinds of projects that have been going on for a long time. An important pillar of the European Union strategy is to help businesses in Europe innovate, grow, and serve consumers better. And this whole project that's going on now, also under the Portuguese Presidency, is part of setting the stage. So if you want to know what the DMA and DSA are in one sentence, which of course is too short, it leaves out a lot, is to say that the DMA's goal is to make the marketplace better for businesses by keeping them contestable and fair, essentially so that businesses can work. Second, the goal of the DSA is to protect end users' rights and safety, and particularly by setting out very clear rules that have to do with legal content. This is also meant to protect our democracies, which we know by recent events is very important. What is special about digital markets? I've just put here 2 points. Of course, you can find more if you want. There's also more in the background paper. The first one is that digital markets strongly respond to size. This has several reasons. One is what economists call economies of scale and scope. It just means that In digital markets, the services can be supplied to so many customers once they are created that essentially a lot of the cost simply gets diluted and size pays back. That is, if you manage to be large, you will be able to undercut in your pricing if you charge anything, any competitors, and it actually allows you to offer services for free in a sense, and we'll come back to that. Second, this is based a lot on data. These services, they take in a lot of data as payment, actually, as the minister already pointed out. These data also aggregate, and the more data you have about customers, the better the services are that you can provide, because these services, they tend to be personalized through those data. You can sell on those data, and so there are actually also returns to size based on how much data is aggregated. Second, this being the digital world, we have a lot of automatic decision making and feedback, recommendations, all kinds of procedures that keep people hooked, that create feedbacks in the system, that make the system grow. You know, you all know the likes on Facebook, the recommendations on other offers. What this has as an effect is that quite often the markets tip to one dominant platform. That means one firm becomes dominant, and then it's hard to actually for any other firm to compete against it. Even in the absence of what is called foreclosure, that is behavior by the large firm that keeps competitors away. There are increased possibilities also for this kind of abusive behavior, and this is also what these new laws are about. The second factor here is there are specific business models that have been developed here in this sector. Having a multi-sided business model is actually not new. So any old marketplace in prehistoric times already was a multi-sided market. But today, these kind of multi-sided business models that run at huge scale, that is intermediation in all different kinds of businesses on one side, consumers on the other, business on one side, business on the other. You can imagine all kinds of combinations. Very often the pricing here is that you give your data on one side and you get the service without paying apart from your data, which has its cost, obviously. And on the other side, a company pays for getting access to you. A lot of these business models therefore involve the monetization of data. The Digital Markets Act. Essentially, the idea, as I mentioned, is to provide a marketplace that works better for businesses so that they can grow and innovate. In order to do this, the Digital Markets Act specifically aims at very large platforms that are gatekeepers. This is actually defined in the Act, what a gatekeeper is. I've cited here the two definitions that are there. The first one, the qualitative one, is the really important. The second one is simply a codification in numbers that applies automatically, while the first one can be judged by the European Commission to see whether companies who do not qualify for the quantitative criteria still qualify as gatekeepers. Once a large platform has been denoted a gatekeeper, obligations will be imposed. There's a long list, which I don't have time to discuss here, nor space to put on the slide, but we can come to, hopefully in the discussion later, to some of those. The European Commission supervises all of this. So it sets the rules, it reviews the procedures itself, the gatekeeper denominations, the obligations imposed, it deals with the enforcement. So all of this is centralized in the European Commission. It will be advised by a Digital Markets Advisory Committee of member states. The Digital Service Act, on the other hand, applies to all digital platforms. There's a hierarchy of size and business models with increasingly stricter obligations. The DSA carries over some important rules from the e-commerce directive, which is what is supposed to replace. The main principle here is that of no general monitoring, which means that platforms will not be obliged to monitor all content. This is important because we don't want to have a general police state in Europe. Rather, there will be rules about what is illegal content, how to deal with it. There are exemptions of liability for some types of platforms. And the country of origin principle arises. That is, each platform will have to say in which member state it is established. And it will be a digital service coordinator in a specific member state that deals with the platform. And only this digital service coordinator can actually enforce and intervene according to those rules. The rules, there are many different aspects concerning content. What is illegal is actually defined somewhere else. It's not here in the DSA, but the national laws will be applied. And this is important. There will be safeguards for citizens to get notified if content that they post gets removed, and they can appeal. So there will be a process actually to guarantee the right of expression and information. It's not only about taking things off, it's also about keeping things on, because democracy needs people to be able to express themselves. There are a bunch of similar initiatives going on. This is important because one of the main objectives of these proposals here is to harmonize law in the European Union. Now, Germany and Austria, they ran ahead with proposals of their own, and I challenge anyone here in the panel to pronounce the names of those laws. The Digitalisierungsgesetz, Kommunikationsplattformengesetz in Austria. Germany created something that's very similar to the DMA, but the obligations are more targeted. Austria created a law that overlaps with the DSA, but gives Austrian courts the right to intervene. Portugal has also announced a law for regulating marketplaces. It's not clear what the exact content will be. The UK has several laws in preparation. This is interesting, of course, because these stem from the same process that also led to the DMA and DSA. And as already has been mentioned in the USA, things are happening. The new Biden administration will present laws, but we don't know yet what shape they take. So what are the controversial issues here? First of all, it's governance. The European Commission in the DMA take charge of everything. In the DSA, it's exactly the other way around. It's for each platform, one individual member state that can take actions. Second, the regulatory philosophy of the DMA is a huge change from previous competition policy principles, which are based on ex post intervention of abuses that already have happened. It moves to an ex ante, that is an intervention that happens before abuses can take place, simply by safeguards being put in place that avoid certain behavior. The question with the DMA is, has the horse already been bolted concerning contestability? That is, some of these platform markets, is there still anything that where European competition will arise? There are many obligations that, for example, deal with transparency. Will these actually be able to change behavior? There are obligations for data portability. Is it technically feasible? Are data, when they are ported, actually still of value? And for example, this is one specific rule here, obligation on search engines. Should search engines be obliged to share only with other search engines? What about the DSA? The DSA concentrates on illegal content, but France, for example, has said, no, we also want to include harmful content and disinformation. So it's a question about the scope of the rules. It is not clear to me how the country of establishment principle for enforcement interacts with the local, that is member states' laws of illegality. So will country A have to intervene on something that's illegal in country B? Second, what about advertising, targeted advertising? Some people have said it should actually be even more restricted or phased out, and this is not foreseen in the DSA. So there is a need for new rules in digital markets. That is very clear. Traditional competition is simply traditional competition law is too slow. It takes too long and happens after the fact. So digital markets are too quick, and we need to keep up with those changes. And the DSA and the DMA are allowed to accompany these markets quickly, create global standards, and, as was said, and solve specific issues that affect our companies and also our citizens. So, and here I hand over. Will they succeed?
Thank you, Stephen. I think you did a very good job in the background paper, which I repeat is available for anyone who wants to learn a bit about this. You and I, we are both economists, but we could write in a way, at least I think, that even non-economists, let's say lawyers and others, understand, and this is our aim in Institute of Public Policy. We have to open the debate for the society and not close the debate on specialists, on just either IT companies or academia in a jargon that no one understands. So again, Stephen, thank you very much for your presentation about both DSA and DMA. And now we are going to move to the panel and focus on the DMA. I will like to introduce the first speaker, to Sofia Alves. Sofia is head of the European Commission representation in Portugal. She joined the European Commission in 2003 and has a vast experience in cartels, antitrust, and merger investigations and control at DG Comp. So you have a lot of experience, Sofia, dealing with practical things. And now that you are temporarily in Lisbon, looking at all this, I would like to start with a general question about the general philosophy and methodology of the Digital Markets Act. So as Stephen just said, basically the Digital Market Act defines what are gatekeepers and what are not gatekeepers. And for those who are, those who have a very big market share and fulfill other criteria that Stephen just mentioned, there are some obligations. For those who are not, they have no special obligation. So it's like we have to-dos for the gatekeepers, and everything can be done for the not gatekeepers. I can give an example. Refraining from combining personal data from a platform with personal data from third parties without specific consent should not also be an obligation for non-gatekeepers. So the question is, to simplify, should we have just a black and white obligations, or should we have black, gray, and white? And the black will be forbidden for every company, big or small. So, Sofia, thank you for being here with us, and I would like to start with this question.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to start actually with a word on event sponsor, Google. I think their involvement signals a very positive engagement in this dialogue, and it should be welcomed, since Google is going to be one of the several essential partners in preparing the European digital space for the future. And now, coming to your question, Yes, the DMA has a very specific objective, and this is indeed to impose obligations on gatekeepers. And why these obligations and why gatekeepers? Because those are considered to be the practices that are indeed harmful to competition because of the sheer size of the gatekeeper. So the concept of gatekeeper, it has to do with the sheer size and the access to the information and data that these digital service providers or platforms have. And this has to do with the ample experience in an economic on competition cases that both the Commission and a number of other competition authorities around the world have. So the DMA objective is really, it has to be very clear because these obligations are of a regulatory nature. As Stephen said, we are not going to look into the markets and the effects on the markets. Those are the practices or the omissions that when are linked to a very big company, a very big gatekeeper as defined in the proposal, are considered to have negative competition effects. And this has to be very clear because this proposal is to be of a regulatory nature. It's going to be applied ex ante. Companies have to comply with the obligations without a competition assessment on the effects. But actually, I would like also to say that the DMA also applies to emerging gatekeepers. So not only companies that already have this position on the market, but those that are evolving and could have that position on the market. And so it's really it's a very evolving type of proposal. As the digital markets evolve very rapidly, basically for us to tackle a certain behavior of gatekeepers, those concepts also need to evolve as we go and as we have more experience. And regarding the non-gatekeepers, so the smaller companies, actually there are other provisions and there are other regulatory proposals that address this. One is the DSA that has already been mentioned. It includes at least 11 areas for transparency reporting, obligation to provide information to users that imply also and apply to small entities other than very large online platforms. And the other act that you have is the Platform to Business Act, which has been enforced now since July 2019. And they also protect against harmful unilateral trading practices by online platforms and unfair contracts in platform to business relations. So basically, that's the difference. There are other proposals, there are other acts that deal with behavior that should be imposed on all platforms, irrespectively of the size. But the DMA is very specific to that list of actions because those actions are anti-competitive if they are linked or enacted by a very big company with the characteristics of a gatekeeper and perform core businesses. So that's basically the reason why.
Thank you, Sophia. I think you were very clear saying that the DMA focus on what are called the gatekeepers and define the criteria very, very well. And also that it considers the possibility of emerging gatekeepers and firms that today are not classified as gatekeepers according to the Commission criteria, and that they can become in the future. And that the focus is on these big companies precisely because they have a big market share and implications of their activity on European citizens at large, at least 10% of European citizens and businesses is also very large. So thank you for your clarification. And now I move to Maria Manuel Leitão Marques, which in here represents the European Parliament. Manuel was a member of the Portuguese Parliament and the Minister of the Presidency and Administrative Modernization between 2015 and 2019. And he's a member of the European Parliament of Group S&D, and she's the Vice Chair of the Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protection. So the European Parliament did initiative, a recommendation in October, so before the Commission sent the proposals of DSA and DMA, urging the Commission to legislate on this. And I would like to mention that this initiative was approved by the large majority of members of the European Parliament. Only 3.6% voted against the initiative. And this shows, and I think this is important to point out, that there is some common ground between the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council on these two initiatives. And this is good because hopefully we will have some final coherent legislation and not every institution trying to put their different views on the topic. So, and also shows that what we are discussing today, it's not something that will be stuck in any institution, be it the Parliament or the Council, but it will move forward and move forward quickly. Maria Manuel, thank you for joining us. I would like to start with a question that has to do with the role of the European Parliament in this discussion, the future role. I know that the discussion has not started yet, but I'm sure that parliamentarians in the European Parliament will discuss, and we have already discussed this initiative, DSA, on the DSA, but also a bit on the DMA. So what are specific topics that you think might arise when you start discussing this issue in the European Parliament?
Thank you, Paulo, and thank you for the Institute for this organization. As you told before, all of us are users, or if not of social media, at least of other platforms as clients to get information, to organize a travel and so on. So we need to involve our citizens in this discussion about these two proposals, because if not, we risk the manipulation of the platforms, of their users. It's a very easy task for them, telling them they are going to reduce the service level or telling them they are going to stop innovation. And it's why it's very important why we are regulating, why self-regulation is not enough, either to protect consumers and users or to protect small business to get their market. And what will change with the DMA for small business? In 4 points very quickly: more independence, greater freedom to choose their providers through interoperability, possibility to move to other platforms through portability, and a greater knowledge and domain of their own market, knowing their clients. At the moment is not possible. And what can we do to improve the proposal of the DMA? What are some critical points that can be improved? First, clarify obligations according to each specific business model, because there are different models, and we need to adapt for different models, including the number of, including in the definition of gatekeepers, expand interoperability into core services, not only to ancillary services, Article 6, improving portability. Stephen has referred, this is a very critical point, how to do that. Clarifying the enforcement of data silos in big platforms, and also maybe in governance, we can, because nowadays we are speaking not only about companies, these big platforms sometimes are really a kind of public spaces. So we need to governance, the governance of these kind of companies should be different from the governance of traditional big companies. And finally, my last point is about enforcement. The minister told before that is similar to the relationships between big retailers, traditional ones, and their providers from industry and agriculture. But we know that we never were able to prevent conflicts between big retailers and their providers. Maybe we soften them, maybe we solve the most serious conflicts, but they exist in practice. And self-regulation was not enough to solve them too. So this is a critical point, but we need to try to do something. And to finish my intervention, as you said before, there is a consensus, not in the details, but there is a consensus, a large consensus in the parliament from the left to the right that regulation is needed. The big deal, the big challenge is to do it at global level, the global standard. We are going to try as we did with GDPR before. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Manuel. And now we move to the industry and see some reactions. Actually, one of the things that you just said, Maria Manuel, I believe that Guido Lobrano will agree, at least one. Let me just introduce Guido Lobrano. He has a background as a competition lawyer and is the Director General for Europe for ITI, the Information Technology Industry Council. ITI is the global association of the technology industry, representing around 80 of the largest tech companies in the world, including hardware producers, equipment manufacturers, cloud providers, software developers, cybersecurity providers, as well as internet platforms, including most of those who under DMA are considered gatekeepers. So we decided in this webinar to invite a representative of the big companies, and Guido is the representative, and also Maria, which represents the middle companies. And so the first question I would like you to address, Guido, is this idea, is making the connection what Maria Manuel just said. Perhaps you agree that there should be a clarification of the obligations considering specific business models. Actually, ITI made a written position about the DMA, and I invite every institution that may be watching this webinar who has some written position to send to us, because we'll put online in our website to promote the public deliberation. So the specific topic that you say in in your paper is, and I quote, any remedies should be tailored more specifically to the type of platform service and be relevant and effective within the specific market and context of application. So this seems reasonable in some sense, but in the other sense, we cannot make such a complex law, I'm referring to the DMA, so that another objective that we all share, which is streamlining the rules, become more complex to achieve. So if we start making too much discrimination between the gatekeepers model of intervention in the economy, perhaps we will end up with a very complex law. So my question is, how do you combine these two different objectives? On the one hand, try to make a more tailored law, but on the other hand, we want streamlining the rules and be focused, as Sophia just said, on a particular firm. So Guido, please answer to this challenge.
Many thanks, Paulo, for the kind introduction, and thanks also for inviting ITI to this event in the context of the Portuguese presidency. That is clearly coming at a very important times in terms of digital regulation in the EU and globally. ITI, as you said, is a global association, so we are looking at these developments in Europe as well as in other markets in the world. Clearly, the European Union is a front runner, as it has been in other contexts like data protection that has been mentioned in the past. So whatever happens in the European Union has very clear, important implications for how future global regulation will develop. And certainly, I agree with the point made by Ms. Leitão Marques and also the minister that we should strive for having as much as possible a global approach to these challenges. As you said, our organization represents companies from all the segments of the tech industry. So we have those companies that are likely to be designated as gatekeepers, but we also have a number of companies that will be or are competitors to these companies, and even others that have, are on the sides of this discussion. But all of them agree that we need to have, first of all, agree on the importance of strong and undistorted competition to promote innovation and growth, and also agree that with the goal of the DMA to ensure access for innovative challengers and also safeguarding economic efficiency. One point on top of the global coordination, I think very important, it has been stressed by the previous speakers as well, is single market harmonization. We definitely need to avoid a patchwork of different rules and obligations within the single market. And so, Stefan mentioned actually a number of ongoing national initiatives in member states, also initiatives in the UK. We believe, it's very important that the DMA makes sure there is harmonized implementation and also harmonized enforcement. There is a discussion going on about the role of national enforcement authorities. We understood the DMA as designated for enforcement by the European Commission. We will strongly recommend that remains the default option. There could be mechanisms to involve national authorities and governments, but by default, we believe, given the nature of the challenges, the European Commission should always take the lead in enforcement of this regulation. On the point that you were making in your question, we understand the goal of moving away from the current competition enforcement that is perceived as long and complex. In the DMA, to do that is actually proposing a number of approximations and presumptions that want to achieve this user enforcement. I understand this approach, but at the same time, I think it's important that we do not oversimplify and we do not overlook important nuances that sometimes require a closer look at each situation. So there is one idea in the DMA that we strongly support, and this is the idea of a regulatory dialogue between the Commission and the companies. It is mentioned in different parts of the proposal. There is not, at the time, a specific provision that defines it better, and we would really recommend that there are more detailed steps for this process of regulatory dialogue, which would be very helpful for the further specification of some of the obligations that are in the articles of the DMA. And this would allow both the companies to better understand how they should apply, how they should move in this new context, but also the Commission to see what is the best way to apply those obligations that actually achieves the desired goals. And you refer specifically, and Leitão Marques referred to the issue of how the concrete obligations would apply to the various core platform services that are in scope. And right now, I think we understand that the idea is that only the relevant obligations would apply to the relevant platform service, but that is not very clearly spelled out in the regulation. And we feel that would be an important clarification to make for legal certainty. I think another important thing to keep in mind is that enforcement of competition law will still remain in place. The DMA is not supposed to replace antitrust enforcement and is not supposed to be a catch-all. So for individual situations that have very precise features, where these general provisions are maybe not suitable, competition authorities will still have the authority to take more targeted action. And so the other side of this is that you should not design these general obligations to capture every single situation, because that would become either too generic or imprecise. And again, another consideration is we are not acting in a vacuum here. I think we shouldn't say that digital markets are unregulated. That is not the case. There is a lot of regulation that applies to companies in general, not only antitrust law, but data protection rules, the P2B regulation that has been mentioned by Sophia, and other measures. So while they do not necessarily target these specific situations, it's also not true that we are moving in a market that is entirely unregulated. So that is also another consideration to keep in mind. I could go on with additional considerations, but I know that we are mindful of time. So I'm happy to stop here, Paolo, and pick up if there are other questions later on.
Okay, thank you, Guido. I move now to a smaller in relative terms of industry, to Maria Martins. Maria is an international business consultant at Quidgest, a Portuguese IT company pioneering in automatic software generation. Although it is still a medium enterprise, it is a multinational tech company pioneering artificial intelligence applied to software development. So Maria, thank you for being here. I'll start with the image that the minister gave. I think it's very, very good. So there are huge motorways, and then there are some cars, and Quidgest is one amongst the other, but I ask you to answer in terms of a firm of your size, an European firm of your size, which has a car and has to enter these huge motorways, which of course are good for traveling quickly from one place to another to do business. But so how does a firm like Quidgest, of the size of medium-sized firm, but already with an international connections and presence, see this new legislation, in particular the DMA?
Thank you, Paulo, and the Institute of Public Policy for the introduction, for the question, and the opportunity to participate in such a high-level panel of discussion. It's been a great learning opportunity so far to hear the inputs of my fellow panelists. At Quidgest, as you well said, we are a medium-sized company, but we've been expanding and internationalizing for the last 15 years. And we've been monitoring the policy debate closely and trying to get our voices heard. So this is also an incredible opportunity for us. It's clear that the last couple of years, the smallest actors have been likely to experience the strongest consequences when it comes to regulation. Fortunately, this time we believe that this new piece of legislation tries very hard to put the SMEs in its core. And this, of course, is no accident, since we represent 99.9% of the European business fabric. We are very excited for these efforts towards standardizing rules within the European digital single market, as Stephen so eloquently clarified. Taking from our own experience working across borders, Quidgest has successfully expanded to other European state members markets, such as Germany. But in this process, we found that when it comes to digital market, there's still a major barrier to expansion for SMEs. That is the set of these fragmented national legislations and a huge amount of red tape. As Guido well said before me, there is a lot of legislation, current legislation around the digital market, but we're talking about dealing with 27 different legislations, rules, and ways of doing things. So this standardization will for sure facilitate the scale up of SMEs within the European digital market. Second, this piece of legislation tries to find a way to deal with unfair competition with external platforms. If it wasn't clear before, I think now it's crystal clear for everyone that we have a current environment that's been increasingly structured and influenced by a very small group of digital platforms, most of them American or Chinese. And we believe this legislation addresses a constant concern for European tech SMEs about our position in the digital world. And it reflects that we should respect and we should protect our European values, such as our focus on privacy or security. We believe that, similar to what happened to the GDPR, this new piece of legislation will have for sure a great contribution to the enhancement of the European way of doing things in the international market. And this for sure has a positive contribution to the enhancement of our companies as examples to follow, leading us or helping us to internationally stand out, allowing us to establish or influence somehow the rules of the game and the standards being applied to the digital market, while at the same time labeling our products in a new level of maturity and quality. I mean, we look, for example, in the case of the Brazilian market, and I can firmly confirm this, as I'm half Brazilian. The Brazilian market tends, and the enterprise Brazilian market tends to follow the American way of doing things for the last years. But when PGS entered the market back in 2019, we saw partners eager to learn from us, from our experience, from our journey on data protection, and looking towards the European regulation as a standard to follow. And third, we believe that this legislation is going to be very important to balance the relationship that we SMEs have with these gatekeepers. We know this relationship isn't perfect, as Dr. Maria Manuelita well put it, but we need each other. We need each other to grow. And this is a fact. We know that we tend to, as SMEs, we tend to rely on these large platforms because they do bring added value to us. They are cross-border vehicles with a large base of consumers that supports our expansions with lower costs. And this is crucial for companies with limited resources. So instead of the idea, and some people have been discussing this with this lens, the idea that we want to antagonize them, what I think this legislation wants to do, and this is the positive way of thinking about it, that what we really want to find here is ways to work together by making the rules of the game fairer, by being transparent and creating an environment where we can cooperate to grow rather than kill each other to survive, as my fellow panelists well emphasized. So in conclusion, we do believe this brings huge positive changes, especially for the SMEs. Conversations such as the one that we're having today should for sure continue. And we should also focus on cooperation and opening dialogues between different stakeholders, as Guido well put it.
Thank you, Maria. We still have some time to a next round of questions that I would like to put to the panel. You can, of course, react to what was said, but we should now be more succinct because time is running. Perhaps I'll come back to Sophia. I don't know if you want to react to other topics that were mentioned, but I would like to add another question, which is a bit further away in our journey because it's after these two acts will be approved. My question is how the Commission would organize itself to implement these new laws, because it's not very usual that, and we teach this in economic courses, that the executive and the regulator are the same institution. And in this process, we have the Commission, which is a co-legislator, and afterwards it will be also the executive of the European Union and the regulator. So don't you think that some changes must happen in the structure of the Commission in order to implement these laws? I'm putting this question because IPP, we give very much importance to the institution background of the public policies, because it's not enough to have a good law. We can have a perfect law, but if the institutions are bad, the law will not be implemented. So this is my general question, Sophia.
Hi, Paulo. I just, let me disagree with you on one thing. The Commission is not a co-legislator. The legislators are
has the initiative. Has the initiative.
It has only the initiative.
I know. Okay.
And as you've seen from the remarks of this panel, I mean, the idea is really to strike a balance, a good balance, as good as we can when we launch the proposal. But of course, this balance between, you know, the obligations imposed on companies, and we also don't want to stifle innovation, and we don't want to prevent innovation, and we want the markets to be competitive. So we need to strike this balance, and this is the balance that is now going to be discussed in the Parliament and in the Council. And now, the model
Sophia, now let me just say that, okay, you are right, perfectly right.
I'll come to your question.
The Commission has the initiative, but of course, now the debate between the Council and the Parliament, you will not be completely out of the game. I presume that talks will be made between the Commission and the Parliament and the Council, or am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. We're always present in that discussions, and we have to explain the proposal, and we're always present in the discussions. But we are an honest broker, and
Okay.
they are the deciders. So, but you have, I mean, there's of course it's a good question, and the DMA enforcement governance or model, I would say it borrows a lot from the competition, the way that competition rules are enforced in the European Union, which is a shared competence between the Commission. And this is a unique, as you say, as a unique feature. It's probably one of the few domains, at least that I'm remembering now, where the Commission has an administrative role and an enforcement role. If in consumer law, for example, the Commission does not have enforcement powers. But in competition, since the very early days, since the beginning of the treaties, it has been decided that when a practice has cross-border effects on the European market, it is a competition the best placed authority. And the member states in that situation, they refrain from applying competition law, and the powers go to the competition enforcement tools. So this is pretty much concept in the sense, and as Guido says, I mean, it has to be very clear that enforcement has to be consistent throughout the European Union. The Commission has the experience of that, and that's basically what we're going to do. Now, whether that is a general criticism that I hear also regarding competition enforcement, that we are the prosecutor and the judge. Let us not forget, that the member states will be closely associated to this process. They are always closely associated also to competition enforcement via the advisory committee. They will also have the possibility under the DMA to request the Commission, for example, to launch an investigation to see whether platform or service provider is a gatekeeper. But on the other hand, we will have one regulatory, not a regulatory body, but an enforcement body that will enforce the DMA. And we believe that this is going to lead to more consistency across the market, which is very important. So, and not to forget that the decisions will be appealable before the Court of Justice, and they are the judges. We're not the judges. In this case, we're going to be an administrative authority, as we are when we apply competition rules.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you were very clear about this. And also in terms of the institutions and the role of the institutions, the Parliament has an important role in when the Commission will implement this act. And in terms of, let's say, its role of fiscal monitoring of the Commission, I'm sure that I'm not saying the correct words, but the Commission responds to the Parliament. So is the Parliament, or what are the idea in terms of capacitating the Parliament to be able to monitor in some way the Commission in the implementation of these new laws? Because this is also very important. The Commission is the executive, the Parliament has an important role, even in this very peculiar democracy, which is European democracy. So Maria Manuel, do you think about?
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you. Let me only add a point that these DMA and DSA are not the only proposals to regulate digital markets. There are others that are coming. Data Governance Act is in the Parliament, is being discussed in the Parliament, and there other proposals are being prepared by the Commission, special on privacy and of course on artificial intelligence. This is a big packet that are going to be developed, and it's very important because there are some relation between the DSA and the DMA, for instance, concerning advertisement, and concerning the principle of know your business customer. Let me come back to your question. I think the Parliament has all the means to be a good legislator. The Parliament has so many resources compared to our Parliament in Portuguese. Technical resources, we can call specialists to discuss with us all the time. We are doing so. We can comment some studies. We have a very good research support in the Parliament. This is not the problem. We have a support ourselves as members of the Parliament in our offices. This is not the Parliament, nor to this discussion on proposals, and after to monitoring the work of Commission. And I totally agree with Sophia on this centralized way to enforcement the DMA. This is a very good decision. I am very worried about the enforcement of DSA that are going to be decentralized as GDPR, and enforcement of GDPR, we know that is not very good for the moment, and it allows regulatory shopping, going to Ireland, and to have a situation more convenient than in other member states. So about the DMA, I think it's a very good option from the Commission in order to have a single market, and a very important point, that is legal certainty for business. This is the most important point, legal certainty for business. A very clear way how to implement this proposal, and to have a very clear way we need to improve some of the articles of the proposals, special in the points I referred before. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Manuel. Guido, I believe you agree with Maria Manuel that industry needs legal certainty. And it's precisely about that I would like to put another question, and the last question, which has to do with rural.
Paul, let me add a small point. My problem,
it has to be small.
Very small. It's time to decision, because if we take a long time to approve these proposals, they are being out-fashioned at that time, because platforms are moving very fast. So,
well, I will give back to you. It depends on you, Parliament and Council, with a little help of the Commission on the background. Guido, this thing about rule harmonization is very important. And the DMA says explicitly that member states shall not impose on gatekeepers further obligations by way of laws, regulations, or administrative action. But then there is an exception. They say, well, there can be an exception that national authorities in terms of public interest. Do you think that, of course, every lawyer, and you are a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, Sophie is a lawyer, likes to put a rule, and after the rule, a small exception. But sometimes this can be dangerous in terms of what Maria Manuel just said, that having a very predictable and certain legal environment. I'd like you to build on this topic, please.
Thanks. It's true that as a lawyer, that provision has clearly captured my attention. And we know that historically, member states have a tendency to exploit. I'm sorry, can you hear me well?
Yeah, perfectly well.
Member states have a tendency to, find these loopholes and use them to the maximum extent possible. So it's definitely our recommendation that, those exceptions for public interest are really, really narrowly tailored in the proposal, in the text of the law, so that there is no uncertainty afterwards as to, what member states can or should do or not. If I may, I would like to quickly come back on the issue of the Commission powers. As I said, we believe, if there is an entity that should be enforcing the DMA, that is certainly the European Commission. Now, that does not mean that, that the Commission has full carte blanche on how they enforce these provisions. The Commission has a lot of experience in enforcing competition law. But here, it has been said many times, this is not competition law. Although, if we look at the proposal, many powers in the DMA are as strong, as impactful as those that the Commission enjoys in the antitrust context. But they are not designed to be taken through the same strictly regulated procedural steps. So our recommendation would be that we have a number of additional due process safeguards that are incorporated already in the DMA. Not only in the context of the regulatory dialogue that I mentioned before, but more generally throughout the process, including the designation, where we see that there are a number of criteria, but also the Commission retains the flexibility to decide that a certain company can be designated as a gatekeeper, even if it does not meet the criteria that are defined in the beginning of the proposal. So overall, we understand the reason for that flexibility, but again, it has to be used in a context where you have very strong due process safeguards. And it's true that you can always go to court, but that is never the ideal solution. Ideally, we would have a very clear framework that applies. Companies would know in advance if they are subject to the scope of the DMA and what obligations they need to apply, in which context, and to which specific platform services. And again, we really want to improve this proposal. There are a number of things that I think do not add up completely. If we go back to the beginning of the discussion, I think, for example, market share has been mentioned a number of times. Actually, there is no reference to market shares in the proposal. The criteria talk about the turnover. So that is essentially tells you something about the size of the company that operates the core platform service. Another recommendation to be more precise here would be that you also look at other factors, like, for example, how much business users depend.
There are lots of things that we could discuss in here.
No, it's a very complicated proposal. I'm sorry that I'm moving fast. I'll be very quick.
But we cannot do with them all today. Thank you for your answer. I have to move to Maria now. Maria, now you are the last commenting on what has been discussed, and one particular topic that was mentioned by Sophie and Bimel, the topic of enforcement is very important. So what can we learn from GDPR, and do you have any preoccupations as well as Maria Manuel mentioned in terms of decentralizing some things? Well, just your thoughts about general thoughts about these topics that were raised.
Okay, thank you, Paulo, for the question. I agree 100% with Dr. Maria Leitão. The problem with decentralizing the enforcement of the law put the situation of the GDPR where we have countries working in a different way and companies working in a different way within the European region. And even if we go out there and we see countries that are trying to replicate what we created, what is so special for us, our GDPR, what we created here within the European region, it's still very difficult to create a standardized version. If you take a look at the Brazilian, we have a lot of discussions on how this is going to be applied, what is the difference between the public sector and the enterprise sector, and how enforcement is going to be made, where we have, in the case of Brazil, a national authority that is not a regulatory authority. It's a hybrid thing in the middle that we don't know exactly how is it going to work. So it's important for us to understand that if this enforcement is going to happen, who should be doing it and how they cooperate at a national level with other regulatory agencies. This is a struggle. Every time this happens, I mean, we're talking about GDPR, but we could talk about anything else that we want to standardize within the European region. Every time we talk about this, we have to take into account that there are national regulatory agencies that will somehow either cooperate or try to make things a bit more difficult when it comes to the enforcement of these regulations. So towards cooperation, I think that the answer is that the idea of it is work towards cooperation, open the dialogue, understand at a national level, what are the concerns, what are the different aspects that the different sectors perceive these type of regulations, what are the current level of maturity when we talk about this type of topics. Because, okay, we are within the European region, but digital maturity, it's different from Portugal to Spain to France to Germany. We're not talking about the same situation because it isn't. So we need to understand in a national level, what is the current level? What is going on? What is the context? And based on that, try to also to understand how enforcement is going to happen in a practical way with the cooperation of national authorities, national regulatory authorities as well. Because as Dr. Manuel well said, when it came to GDPR, that was a major, and still is a major issue.
Well, thank you, Maria, and thank you all. Of course, we could stay all the morning or all the afternoon discussing these topics. The idea is not to go into the detail to everything. As European citizens and the Institute of Public Policy is, as I said, a non-governmental organization settled in Portugal. We very much look forward that this legislation comes forward and that it's improved with the dialogue between the Council and the Parliament. And let's just remember that this is not just about the economy, it's not just about fair and contestable markets, it's also about, and I'm thinking about DSA, it's also about democracy, consumer rights, citizens' rights, privacy, protection of personal data, and so on. This is a very fascinating topic, this topic of democracy and individual rights. Institute of Public Policy gives much attention to this, and who knows, in 1 year time, when the discussion is more developed, we can come back with you and to discuss this other topic that for us is also very important. Let me just thank you again, all the speakers and the participants and all that are watching us, and thank you very much for your attention. Have a nice day.